These are 10 novels that can wake logic bros up, which is almost the impossible task because the war against the logic bros, the deconstructor and destroyers, the annoying dude that we know that can only see reality through his single objective vision.
Are you familiar with the philosopher Friedrich Schelling? Have you read the critical historical introduction to the philosophy of mythology?
These 10 novels can wake logic bros up. They can pluck them out of nude sleep because we all know way too many of these logic bros who can see any problem through their single objective vision and deconstruct and destroy everything in the name of science, of lowercase t truth. And they'll say, I never got affection when I was younger. I have no feelings. I don't know how to feel. We all know them. And they are one of the main reasons that a literary renaissance cannot happen, because they are nothing but dead weight. But we can't just leave them behind because they'll be clawing us down the entire time. But rather, we need to take up the war that the greatest visionary of the English language, Mr. William Blake, the divine madman, Mad Blake, the visionary, took up when he painted Isaac Newton. William Blake loved the term nude sleep. William Blake said that may God keep us from single vision and nude sleep. William Blake said that art is the tree of life and science is the tree of death. And the logic bros right now are already pre-commenting on the video. They have their keyboards out. They are ready to go to war. And they are saying, logic is the only way that you can make this video. I would rather live in a world, right, conscious, of logic than religious fanaticism. I would rather live in a society where there isn't some random traumatized bro tearing down anything transcendent from the past, the things that uplift us, and preventing anything from becoming transcendent in the present. And so I am speaking to you, logic bros, and I am speaking to everyone who knows one, everyone who has to deal with one, who's married to one, your brother-in-law, that dude at work. These are the novels that can help them. This is what it's all about, everyone, using literature to rid people from the abyss. And that's what I do here on Right Conscious. I talk about the best transformative books and authors of all time. There is no book talk, booktube fluff going on over here. Pure fire all of the time. And if you guys want more free content like this, I have talked about hundreds of books and hundreds of authors on this channel, so subscribe and go check it out. And so, enough from me, everyone. Well, I guess you're going to hear a lot more from me. We have to talk about the GOAT book, the book that, of course, you know I already have to talk about, the Logic Bros Conundrum. And that is none other than Infinite Jest coming out of the bookshelf right now. One day I want an entire shelf filled with Infinite Jest books just to troll. Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace at its core is about communication. And that is what logic bros lack. They cannot just communicate with others in an emotional way, in a deep way. Even worse, they cannot communicate with any other system within themselves other than logic, because to learn a new mystical, religious, emotional framing of reality takes time. It takes belief. It's not something you do in a month. It's something you do in a year. And if you're a 35-year-old logic bro and you have none of that, it's going to take you years and years to gather all of that and be able to escape it. And that's one of the big problems. Even worse is that you can logic, as many characters in this novel do, your way out of any problem. Once again, it's the deconstruct and destroy mindset. You can justify or weasel your way out of any actual self-reflection or growth or accountability through logic. It's through that subjective softening and reflection where real growth takes place. And because we live in a society that rewards pure logic in the STEM fields, people can gain power, feel smart, look good, communicate with others with just one framing of reality. But it sucks though, because many of these individuals, as we see in this novel, become logic bros. get stuck in this frame because of trauma in the first place. And so there are so many adolescent adults out in the world who are 35, have the job, the wife, the career, but have no depth, have no feeling. We've all met them before. And the problem is that the journey to fix that isn't a 6 month journey. It's a 5 to 10 year journey. Plus they are going to have to process all this stuff that they should have been processing when they were 13 to 18, 18 to 30. Doing it that all, as someone who's been conditioned in one mindset for decades, is almost an impossible task. And that's where literature is the bridge, because something like Infinite Jest will tickle the logic bros' brain pickle, right? It will make them have to work hard. It's going to present a challenge for them. But imbued throughout this entire novel are transformative symbols, patterning. I call it image patterning, that is made specifically for these logic bros, because Wallace in this novel really talks about the things that prevent us from communicating with each other and communicating with ourselves. And those things include, I'm not going to really spoil anything in any of these reviews, drugs, entertainment, politics, sports, and familial trauma. Those are the main things that create communication breakdown across the entire board. And one of the more shocking parts of the novel to me, which really brought a lot of light to my life, which really helped me escape being a logic bro. And I should say that when I was 18, you guys, this was me starting to sound like a infomercial. I was once 400 pounds, but I was the atheist logic bro, just trying to boom gotcha everybody all of the time. And as I've talked about before, it wasn't until I sustained 2 traumatic brain injuries doing extreme sports and had to take a break from reading, from writing, from philosophy, all these different things. It wasn't until then that I had to use my emotional side for the first time because my head hurt. I actually couldn't think very deeply for like a couple weeks or, a month or two, and didn't feel right. And so I started to meditate. I started to just spend time out in nature and do nothing, have zero ambition. And for the first time in my life, emotions, revelations, visions started to appear to me. And in that lack of overthinking, my entire life changed. And Wallace talks about how all addicts, he says like 99% of addicts are overthinkers. Because the sad thing is that you can use logic to justify anything, to get out of anything, to weasel out of accountability, even just self-accountability. It's an endless loop. And we've all seen so many people play it before. And when my back's up against the wall, sometimes I do it too. It can be a natural response. That logical framing can be useful for that too. I feel like it's almost biological. That's why everyone kind of has it and can be very visceral, because the act of being accused, the act of having to use your brain because maybe you don't have the brawn to survive, is a real thing. And I understand that. But we don't have to live like that, especially in this technological wasteland, in this cultural wasteland that we are in right now. Those aren't the type of people that are going to fix that problem, which the logic bros love to complain about. And so this novel talks about, for instance, how drugs, even such as marijuana, can prevent people from creative framings of reality, because drugs have been a classic way, even if they're psychedelic, even if they are psychoactive, like marijuana, classic way to indoctrinate people and lock people into a single vision. I know that in my journeys with psychedelics, which I've done over 100 times, and marijuana, that it has mostly been this wake up artist for me. But I know countless dudes from high school, met countless people along the way who have used marijuana to just further enmesh themselves into what they already are. They become more hyper-suggestible and fall deeper and deeper into their single vision, and use a weak system of logic to reinforce that and stay sheltered forever. It's crazy. We all know that person too. Wallace talks about in this novel the structure of our society. And the reason that this is good, let me talk about why logic bros need this. Because there are sections of this that are really hard. There are puzzles in here. Infinite Jest is a complete novel. If you've read it one time, it won't make that much sense. But I've read this 4 or 5 times now and researched all these different theories, and 99% of the loopholes in Infinite Jest actually close. But you'll never be able to understand this novel and close out a lot of it with pure logic, because there are some logical things that need to be investigated. Some of the timeline stuff, some of how do these characters meet? There's a lot of that stuff going on. Some of these connections questions and puzzles, that could be solved through the logical mind. But a lot of it means nothing unless you can understand a lot of the subtle character motivations for things like incest, suicide, murder, betrayal, all the, drug use, all this different stuff. None of it makes sense unless you can really tap into that. And there is no online guide that can tell you that. There is no one except your own emotional system within that can really show you that. And what this novel does is that by blending these hard parts with these easy parts, with these ecstatic parts where it's fun to read, what it does is get you out of the shell a little bit, because you're reading, you're trying to understand, and then it's flowing, but then you're in someone else's perspective. And sometimes it's absolutely silly. Sometimes it's useless. But as it starts to move forward, you understand that a lot of the silly parts aren't useless, but actually matter. And so you have to invest yourself emotionally into the book, and especially if you want to understand it and not just view it as another book to, check off on your list, because that's what a lot of logic bros do. That's what a lot of people do in the reading world now. And it's very unfortunate. You hear people over in the book talk world, and this is always so annoying. They're like, book reading has become commodified. It's become performative and all of this stuff. And it is frustrating to, see the girl with the 18 shelves of fantasy behind her, that's all color coded. But what's even worse is when people want to have I'm going to read the great works mentality. I'm going to read the Western canon. And by the end of it, or by 10% through, they're still the same person. They've not changed. Just checking books off the list and reading them to read them means nothing. Having access to all the greatest literature in the world, if you have a library card, basically, for free, is as big of a gift to a human as like the ability for all of us, unless you're like an incel, to have sex, to be able to connect deeply with someone and like experience all that. Rilke said the worst thing that God did was make sex available to poor people. And that's like Rilke being crazy, but it's his gift, dude. And you could ruin it by jerking it all off in a way, or by, being too promiscuous, or, rejecting it altogether. Like there's so, and becoming repressed. There's like all of this stuff that can happen. And the same is true when it comes to knowledge and the world of reading. And a lot of the time it's because of this checklist mentality. And something that happens, something I should warn against, and something that's so sad that happens to logic bros or people who come at these books with this logical check the list angle, is that if you haven't figured out if you haven't had a book change your life yet, change how you feel, drive you to start researching things and changing practices in your own life, then you're in big trouble. Because that's what was supposed to happen when you were an adolescent. You were supposed to read one of these easy novels that you maybe read in high school, like The Great Gatsby, or Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, or The Stranger, or Notes from the Underground, and change your tune. You're supposed to let it make you feel deeply. Even if it sent you toward being more of a logic bro or nihilistic, you were supposed to see how literature or music or movies could really change who you are. And that's even a deeper, thing that I've seen, is that the people who don't let music people who like music, like movies, but don't let it overtake them. Let it change them. Even scarier, people that don't watch movies or film or listen to music at all. And with that mentality, when you come to a lot of these books, they're going to be letdowns. Because, you read Blood Meridian and you're like, oh, that was so violent. That was cool. Or you read The Brothers Karamazov. Oh, that was cool. Like, whatever. But if you feel through those novels, if you let it touch you, if you explore the extreme archetypes within your own soul, not just through a quick fantasy like, oh, that would be cool to do that, but let yourself embody it and feel its contrast with the other extreme archetype, like the killer side of you and the healer side of you. It's very valuable stuff. Those stuck in a logical framing of reality don't do that and are let down by these books. This is why there are so many visceral attacks of books. People think that I'm like this because I talk about entertaining fiction and all this, that I'm some troll or I'm mean or I'm pretentious. But I'm fine with entertaining stuff. I watch dumb stuff and read dumb stuff all of the time. My message is, though, we have enough of that. And if you have a gift, if you have all this time, if you're going to make an effort to do something extra with your time other than just go to work every day and die, then why not do something meaningful with it? Why not try to write something transformative? And man, oh man, if you do not already know, the Right Conscious Book Club is the place to find novels that can change your life, that can rock your socks off. We are the most active book club in the world. The problem with most of the book clubs here on BookTube or online or even in person is they read one book a month. Are you kidding me, everybody? What if you don't like the book? What if the book sucks for 3 months in a row? But here I am, dumping my heart out on the line every day, talking to you about the thousands of books I have read. And I am hopefully somewhere in those 6 to 10 recommendations every single month going to provide to you a book. And I give information about it, each book and who should be reading it. One book that can be that for you every single month. You don't have to join all 10 groups, but I'm here to give you guys options. And so over on Substack, I run my book club, but also over there is over 100 hours of content like you can find on this YouTube channel on Substack, but it's better. It's more meta. It's uncensored. It's on so many different topics. I have writing courses, literature courses, specific book breakdowns, just so much content. I do live streams over there. I've posted my own writing. And so if you love this channel, if you want to support me, if you want to help my push of creating a literary renaissance and be there for me when I'm gambling, having just quit my job, then hopefully we can have an equal exchange over there. Hopefully I can provide you a ton of good content and you can support me. And so I will put the link down in the description below. Our book clubs are really fun. Not too much logic bro going on, but sometimes we logic bro. Sometimes we'll rant and go over on time because we're talking about World War II or something. But it's usually good vibes from we have professors who have PhDs and we have people who are reading for the first time in 40 years or coming out of high school. Like all different reading levels are welcome. And I will see you guys over there. And let's get back to the video. And if you look at the history of this channel, find me talking crap about authors. Who do I talk about? Sarah J. Maas, Rupi Kaur, Ocean Vuong? There are very few times when I actually shit on authors. And even more rare where I say an author is a bad writer. It almost never happens. Because I know that when you're in that logical framing that there is no way unless you hold on to like one person or one framing that works in your logical system that you can elevate everyone else because they don't fit in that slot. You can't feel into it. You can't understand it. And that's why so many people get obsessed with David Foster Wallace and Cormac McCarthy and these figures because they live through that framing in a logical way in this like suit in this, I should say they can logically fit just like one or two authors or things into their system, but everything else is too much. So they have to tear it down because they can't actually understand it. Because you can sit and memorize everything you're supposed to say and know about infinite jest, but it's a cheat. It's a cheat code. It's not you actually figuring it out. And the only way you can figure out literature is if you are in this artistic mindset, have that openness. And so that's why the structuring of this novel is very awesome to me because it really forces that hand on these people. And so circling back to this idea of psychedelic drugs, this novel viscerally shows drugs, anything from alcohol, marijuana, caffeine, any of that stuff, nicotine, closing people off. It also shows sports, very genius stuff. What do you have to do to be a great athlete? You have to have that, the standard, the bar is so high now, you have to have that single vision. That's why, especially in like sports like the NFL or soccer, football, cricket, a lot of the Olympic sports where there has to be a ton of dedication involved. You never see any and there's some exceptions here, but like flamboyant or like interesting personalities or intellectual thinkers, because they work, they put in their 40 to 60 hours a week like a lot of us do. But where is all that energy? I know janitors and random dudes who I work with that have more personality than the person with the most personality in the NFL. And that's because to reach that level, you have to have a single vision. You have to become football. This novel talks about what happens when you become tennis, what you have to give up, the vision that you have to become great. And what's so great about this is that they're trying to not do that. So there's a tennis academy in this book called Enfield Tennis Academy. And Wallace, in one of his footnotes in here, goes over their educational protocol, and they're doing this like revised version of the trivium and quadrivium and focusing on optics and writing all these crazy essays, and like they're trying to hijack education and what's supposed to make you feel and attune it to the single vision. But at the same time, it's also because it's education and they're going deep, creating too much expansion in the souls of the students. And because the guy who started the school is this like famous filmmaker who's really odd, so they're trying to keep things tight, but they're not. So they're trying to, take on this new philosophy and it's not working. You can't balance two things at once. You can't be a logic bro and be expansive all at the same time. Literally. This is why when you meet those scientists and the engineers and the STEM dudes, they are the way that they are. This is why when those dudes do This is why when Mark Zuckerberg goes and gets a purple belt in jiu-jitsu and does ayahuasca and all this stuff, that he's still weird. He still acts that way. And it's not just because he's a billionaire and that he's Mark Zuckerberg. I've seen this happen countless times. I know these guys because those roads lead in two different directions. And there's only so far you can go. If you're all the way out here in the logical world, you can kind of pitter patter and once again, kind of fake that you are, down this side of feeling, but you really aren't. And I'm not trying to really gatekeep or or anything like that. It's just the way that it is. And because things have gotten so extreme in terms of how deep you can go into the science, into science and math and into single visions to attain success, then it's a disaster. And what's also really cool is that if you go too far in the artistic direction, what you get those people, we've all met them, the artistes, the feelers, the hysterics, the histrionics, all these people, right? And so the actual solution is, what do you guys think? Yes, the combination of the two. Higher consciousness is one vision, being able to sustain a focal point, a connection to the transcendent, while also being able to explore and look around at all the other possibilities. But that is actually a spiritual practice. When you look at shamanism and their practices of focusing on sacred objects or spending time out in nature, focusing on certain animals or all this stuff, it's about developing this pinpoint accuracy and breaking out of all framings and just seeing reality as it is, not with logic, not with feeling, but just as it is. And the same is true in yoga, Buddhism, and Hinduism. If you look at the sixth limb of yoga, it's dharana, which is about concentration. You can't meditate or actually do mindful meditation correctly. And this is something they never tell you in your, the meditation course or on the online program until you actually have learned how to see with a single vision or see reality clearly. The same is true if you look at Christian monks and their dedication to the contemplation of divine images and all this stuff. All the information about this, about how to break free from being a logic bro and not become one of these artiste manqué types is out there, but it's hard work, you guys. I've been on this path for 12 years and it is something that's not just hard to do, but when you're inundated with technology, job, family, all this stuff, it's even harder to maintain. And so it's easier to fall into the mock shadow. It's easier to fall into the single vision or just being this emotional whirlwind of a mess. And so Infinite Jest, when it comes to sports, tackles all of that. Sports are the single vision. The same with politics. So politics are a big part of Infinite Jest. With the AFR, this Quebecois terrorist organization, and this new formation of a government between a North American superpower in this novel, between America, Mexico, and Canada, that's the central focus of the novel and many of the characters, and they give up a lot for it. But that's our life also. How many people, probably including yourself, have this pinpoint focus on politics, this single vision when it comes to it all? So much so that you can't even break out of the two-party mother-father system and dialects and characters that are being trotted out to us, all to lead us to the same goal, which is totalitarian control. It doesn't matter what side you vote. If we voted pure Democrat or pure Republican since, 2008, we'd still be marching on down that road. And we become obsessed with it. It breaks families up. It breaks the self up. It gives you that urge to go check CNN or Fox News every single morning or whatever, news outlet you're using. And we've all talked to speaking of sports, we've all talked to the logic bro that knows every single stat, every single little thing. We've all talked to way too many logic bros that are obsessed with politics and could argue, we've talked to the people who are on the emotional side who are screaming about whatever atrocity, but then on the other end, the people who are obsessed with the axiomatic ethics of libertarian thought, of natural law, and then on the other side of the mathematics of a controlled, public market, all this stuff. It goes on, and there's a beautiful Eshtaton game section in the middle of Infinite Jest that makes fun of all of it, that deconstructs the entire thing. So there are countless, basically Wallace shows us all of the things that we get lost into. And then entertainment, the same thing with entertainment. So it's a single vision because it's a simulacra. It's not reality. It's easier, especially if you are one of these logic bros. This is what happens. This is the inhumanity of so many people online right now. So I can talk about this from both angles. There are so many people who think that everyone who lives in North Dakota or Kentucky are just a bunch of redneck hillbillies, and just because they vote Trump, they're just a bunch of idiots. But they've never been with those people. They never talked to those people. And if they have, then they're like, I grew up in this, but they're traumatized. And the same is true with people who, when they talk about all the craziness in Portland, oh my God, but like they've never been to Portland. They never have been friends with a diverse group of characters. They've never been friends with a bunch of gay people or trans people, all that, and see that most of them aren't this archetype that they see online and that they're complaining about. So easy to get lost in the entertainment, in the stories, and view that as reality. And that's what Wallace really tackles in this book. And it's so funny. It's always the people. It's like the classic thing, like, you know, the jock that's the tough guy, you know, is secretly gay or has his feminine side. And it's the same with these logic bros, that they're secretly obsessed and get into all these different things that actually aren't logical and aren't real at all, just as a means for them to never escape their single vision. It's really good stuff happening here in Infinite Jest. And so I'm concluding over on the Substack, which I just told you about, my Infinite Jest course. It will be done at the end of October 2025. It's already like 13 or 14 hours. So if you want to read this along with a companion guide from me, and also I have a bunch of archive book club calls. I've gone through this 2 times, and you could always ask me questions over there. Then go ahead, feel free to read it. It's a really good read. And if you follow my course, you will get a lot out of it through the first read. And so then you probably won't have to read it again. And so the next book on our list today is actually right here. And it is The Brothers Karamazov, because two of the great enemies of logic bros that they need to heal through are, first of all, Christianity, and second of all, paganism. And we've seen this new wave over the last 5 or 6 years of logic bros who are Christians or like fake ass Christians now attacking paganism. It's all demonic. But we first need to start with one of the greatest books of all time and one of the great healers of logic, Logical Insanity, which is The Brothers Karamazov. And this novel sets up this idea of the logic bro beautifully, because and I won't spoil anything necessarily, but there are these 3 brothers, and one, Alyosha, is the pious, restrained one. He's trying to walk this righteous path and kind of do what I was talking about earlier. Then on the other side of the aisle, we have the sensualist, Dmitri, who is a hedonist, who's just, you know, a drinker, into women, and all of this stuff. We could say he's more on the artiste manqué, you know, way too deep into the feel side. Then on the logic bro side, we have Ivan. But something that's hidden in this novel that I think a lot of people don't talk about is that in this novel, there is a logic bro, right, named Ivan. And he talks about, you know, how the transcendental order, natural law, all this stuff doesn't exist. But then another character who isn't as brilliant, one could say, who has some mental problems, takes what he's saying and puts it into action, into this crazy act. And this is something that we see all of the time, that these logic bros, these restrained individuals, sit at home and stoke the polarization fire from their keyboard, do all this stuff, play these logical games, but don't realize that that actually has an effect on people who maybe aren't as like logically finessed as them, but also are still in kind of the feeling realm. Because when you go too far into the logical world, your ideas leave reciprocity. They leave the community. They leave the idea of responsibility and obligation, the ethics of them, the objective morality of them, even if you don't believe in that. But just like the things we all need to believe in and hold on to if we want to live in a decent society that isn't just a technocratic control system, have to be included. But you never hear these people talk about this stuff. It's one of the more peevy things about talking with logic bros is that you try to get to the heart of the matter. You're like, well, what about the people? What about this? You try to bring any emotionality to it. Then they just brush it off. They can't talk about it. It doesn't matter. They don't want to discuss morality. I mean, and that's what it comes down to at the end of the day. That because you can't prove objective morality or subjective morality, it's really easy to say, oh, they're all just a fucking bunch of liberal moral relativists or bunch of crazy Christians that believe in natural law, instead of really feeling into the situation and understanding it and framing reality through it all and trying to understand the third way out of it all. And what happens to all logic bros, and it's sad as they get older, is that when you have the ability to do unlimited deconstruction, which is what we have now, I can do it and you can do it. What it usually leads to is the absence of love. There's no way to do all that unless you're just doing it as a thought exercise or whatever, to detach from love to bring love along as you do that. And so what it eventually becomes, though, is self-cannibalizing. You eventually start to eat yourself because of it, because you can always come up with another counter example. There's no end to it all. And what eventually you realize is that you don't feel right in this world, that you can't actually live in this world with this mindset instead of sitting in that feeling. Yes, the feeling, and letting that feeling take you somewhere. What logic bros do, what these logical types do, is just continue on that journey so they never have to stop. And one could say the same thing about the artiste manqué. I'll make a video for them, the people that feel way too much, and always. It's always nonstop. There is no silence. There is no accuracy in their thoughts. And so this situation, and this is what the Brothers Karamazov shows us, is that all of this happens because of an absence of love. But now I have to ask, well, how do you get love back? And that circles back to Infinite Jest. It comes through communication. It comes through people. It comes from the communication within yourself, to pets, to the entire world, in every single moment, with an act of love, with the seed of hope, without the pessimism. And we'll talk about this all day too, the ironic culture that we live in, the flattening of our culture through irony. Ever since Family Guy came around, everyone can make a joke about anything. Everything's fucking dumb. Everything's silly. Everything's a game. I remember long time ago, this was 10, 12 years ago, I had one of these logic bro friends, and started to date somebody new. And he's like, what does your room look like? And I was like, yeah. She's like, it's like a bohemian with crystals and like all this new age stuff. He's like, oh, she's crazy, bro. All this stuff. Those girls are crazy. And what he was saying is, oh, you can't control them. And yeah, he was right. She was crazy. But also in that relationship, which was tumultuous at times, it opened me up to the extremes of feeling, of like so many different things. And so guys like him logically avoided that type of any type of relationship that would create that confrontation, create that love, and then also viewed that type of person as someone as a joke to just kind of dominate, who was dumb. And while doing that, just like when you do that to anything, you're really not going to get the best side out of them. And what are you going to get? You're going to get the crazy side, the reactive side. And what's crazy is that, that's a theme in the Brothers Karamazov. I remember a section where he says that love in the world is harsh, man. It's not easy. Love in dreams is easy. You could sit as a logic bro. This is why we have an addiction, why there is such an addiction to pornography with young men right now. And now those men who started watching porn in 2000, they're all adults now. They were a teenager back then, but now they're in their 30s, their 40s. It's easy to live all that out in dreams with these people, whether you glorify them or just like, oh, they're dumb, like whatever. But love in real life, doing relationships, it can be harsh. It's not easy. That's why there are so many, don't get married because you're going to get a divorce. Yeah, it's hard. But what about the successes? What about if you can make it happen? And what about all the lessons that are learned? Because with logic, you should never get married. You should never have kids. You should never do any of this. And it's crazy to see this now happening from every single side. It's literally the one all be all. Like, it was really sad. One of the saddest stories of a logic bro happening to a girl that I know is I knew this girl in high school. She lived out in the country. She drove into our school, like the country, county, had horses, did all this stuff. And she drove into our school, and she was that person, man. The girl who liked horses, the girl who wanted 5 kids before she was 30, like all of this stuff, right? And very smart, very, sarcastic, very good mind, but went to university, got overtaken. And this is going to sound like I'm on the Daily Wire or something, with leftist ideology, but like at a really bad level. And it was really sad to talk to her and hear her say, I don't want any kids. I don't want to be in a relationship and all of this stuff. And I was like, I know your parents, like you didn't have a hard life. And like, it wasn't, and I was like, why? Well, because they're going to emit, this is her answer. There's going to be too much carbon in the world. It's bad for the environment. It's all these things. She was saying numbers to me. And it was just so sad because I wanted to look at her and be like, dude, out of our entire high school, if someone was going to be that badass who was killing it out in the world and like doing awesome things and like making an impact out there, but also a really cool mom, you would probably be one of the best. Like, you really have that gift. Like, and you don't have to do that, but don't tell me you're not going to do that because of fucking carbon emissions. Like, if you don't want to do that and you want to live your life, cool, just fucking say it. But like logicking your way out of that, out of actually living life, and she's not living life. Someone who could make a huge impact in the world is now stunted because of logic. And it's happening to someone who has deep feelings probably that were too deep and didn't have enough people in the community or the environment around her to let them kind of expand outward. and was probably, like I said, I don't know her too well, but seemingly at some point must have been exploited. So instead she said, fuck it, I'm going to protect myself. But then that was all reinforced by the culture. It's okay to do that. It's okay to come in, but eventually you're supposed to flower out again. So really, these stories make me want to cry, man. It's like all these people who are lost, so many of my male friends lost forever because they don't want to take that risk. The numbers aren't ever going to work, you guys. This novel talks about Jesus' teaching. Jesus, was a visionary when it came to, breaking the spell of narcissism. He knew that if you started to love your neighbor, if you just repaired your relationship with one person, that you would start viewing people instead of them being spectacles, which we all do now. Like I was talking about earlier, we throw them into these little archetypes, these little stereotypes. You would view them as your neighbor. You would view them as someone to love. If you actually take, personal responsibility and understand the concept that when one suffers, we all suffer, and you don't have to solve world suffering. And logic, bro, that yes, you can't end all the suffering in the world. Yes, but we can do a hell of a lot to get rid of a lot of what's happening in the world right now with little to no effort, with just some mindset changes. We don't need any more money. I don't need any money. If everyone had a couple flips, go in their brain and orient a little bit toward love, the world would be how much better of a place. And another thing that logic bros do that this novel talks about is the community, about even Alyosha, whose father sucks and his brother suck, and all this stuff happens throughout the novel. He still orients toward love. And this is the, point of the community that we've lost now. That if you can trust people, if you can get over that, which can be a really hard thing to do, especially if you've been burned before, if you can get into that, then it'll be easier to reach the transcendent heights. And so the Brothers Karamazov with like the Grand Inquisitor section and all this, it doesn't say stop thinking. It says don't make it your God. Don't make it your idol. Jesus had a very similar message. It's the wisdom of all the thinkers, like the Buddha and many of the Eastern texts. All these people, they were saying they were precise thinkers. They were smart. Jesus less so than the others. It's interesting that if you look at like philosophy, like if you look at a lot of prophets, like Jesus has some of the more simple messages and languages, and that's what makes it like really awesome. But nonetheless, they all moved away from a lot of that stuff. This novel also really fast is about how your logic, how your cleverness like hurts people, and how that can, like I just said, kick off some negative chain of events. And so something to be wary of. Anytime I've like demeaned somebody or been mean to someone, bullied somebody or whatever, even if it was very light, it always came from a place of logic. Isn't that crazy? Think about it. It doesn't come from a place of feeling like I hate this person. It comes because you dehumanize them through logic. And that's the same with all these countries that dehumanize people. Even though you see the rah-rah propaganda, there had to be a logical dehumanization and checklist done in everyone's brain to say, yep, we can go do this. Yep, that's okay. So what we've seen like with the entire thing happening with like Israel and Gaza, there's so much happening behind the scene. And if you try to talk about it from people from both sides, but especially like, hey, all these civilians don't need to die. Like there's this logical maze. It feels like you're wading into apologetics that starts to happen. It's like this and that. It's like, well, I understand that. But once again, look at the situation you've created and you've dehumanized it all. You don't care about the bodies. It's the counting of the bodies. Like it's something that we did in Vietnam. We counted the bodies, how many people died, every single night on the news. And it's actually something that's happened. And now that this conflict has ended, it happened again. There were, for a while, 70 to 100 people dying every day. And the number could have been higher, but the number was kept lower because there is a threshold that we can't handle, like the world community wouldn't handle. If that number was 1,000 people every day, we'd erupt and shut it down a lot faster than we did. But if it's at 100, we can logically say, oh, that it's okay. And so those calculations were made of how many people can we kill every day, which is insane. So next up on the list, we have Dune, of course. We have to talk about Dune, and this is books 1 through 6. I mean, I don't even know where to start here. I won't really spoil anything here. I'll just say names, and if you know what it means, you know what it means. You won't really spoil anything. But across, just talking about book 1, everyone hopefully has seen the movie by now, so nothing really is spoiled here. There is a logical behind the scenes force that has been hijacked to uplift Paul Atreides into the role of this Mujahideen type character, this messianic character. The Bene Gesserits were planting these seeds and hybridizing the Fremen's kind of conception of this, oncoming Messiah for such a long time. But what's so great is that they had their own logical system. They had their own logical conception of creating this Messiah themselves through what? Breeding programs, eugenics, which is the highest level of logic broing. Thinking that you can, through genetics and breeding and all this stuff, create the greatest person, this messianic figure that can change everything, that can even do these unfathomable things like, take the water of life and bridge the masculine and the feminine and memory gap and all this stuff. Absolutely wild, right? But that's what they were doing. But where did their logic get them? It got, eventually leads to the destruction of their order. Eventually leads to the scattering. It eventually leads to the God Emperor. It eventually leads to pure logic, to the highest level of all of it. That's where it all leads to. And so it's an absolute disaster. And this novel shows us what happens when you orient as an individual and as a society toward all this. It's a novel that shows us, even after the Butlerian Jihad, where all computers were eliminated, that with the mentats, what happens when we still turn humans into computers, when we still use logic way too much. One of the reasons why the emperor and a lot of these Bene Gesserits fell is because they logically couldn't compute what Paul Atreides was going to be able to do. The human spirit, the it factor, the power of the Fremen. They didn't even know how many there were. Like, all of these things couldn't be figured out unless it was through the heart, unless Duncan Idaho went out there and talked to them, unless someone like Paul Atreides was willing to engage with them and, by sucking out the water of the dude he killed, like engaging in their rituals, engaging in their psychedelics, sleeping with one of their women, hybridizing with them in that manner. Paul Atreides walked toward them and gave them everything that he had and went fully into their system. And then by the time we hit books 2 and 3, we see where logic and prescience and this pure sight actually becomes a problem. The detachment from the family, the neglect of the sister, like all these different things, the neglect of the children, the neglect of the wife Chani, like all these different things lead to the downfalls that eventually occur until we hit the pure logic being, And even with that, in the 4th novel, we see the limits of logic. Like I said, I'm trying not to spoil anything here. We have these great reflections on logic. They're just endless and talking about all that. And one of my favorite Frank Herbert quotes, I actually used to do a lot of Dune content. I had this Dune intro, is deep in the human unconscious is a pervasive need for a logical universe that makes sense. But the real universe is always one step beyond logic. Deep in the human unconscious.
Sean Delancey, 13 Action News.
Is a pervasive need for a logical universe that makes sense.
Pro Tem Michelle Fiore about the construction of the Haybarn Event Center at Floydland Park.
But the real universe
is always one step beyond logic.
The thing that we do not support is having right in the historic park core a 500-person event.
Boom, that's a funny story. That video doesn't have any views. It was so funny. That was like, COVID was happening, right? And there was this protest at this park I went to my entire life because they were basically commodifying it, and they did it like in a really shady way. They were like ruining the park. But this was like right during lockdowns, and so they had police there. Yes, police there enforcing the mask mandate for all the protesters, which was ridiculous. But the same day, this isn't... But anyway, we brought our Dune books for the park stuff. We just were holding our Dune books up the entire time, for the nature protests. Like, they were corrupting and ruining the desert. It was a really funny time, man. Talk about the police state, though, man. We're all outside, and dudes were literally getting carted off and shoved, physical contact being made by the police because they weren't wearing a mask. And they weren't even in the crowd. Like, just ridiculous. And what I was about to say, which was so ironic, was literally as that was happening, it was the day that George Floyd died. And then the next day we were on the front cover of the newspaper with like our photo with that. And then all these other protests started in Las Vegas with, the George Floyd riots, and no one was wearing a mask and the police didn't enforce anything. And it was madness. So anyway, and even worse, the park was commodified and ruined. So bad times. But Dune is great because you have 6 books to get this programming. Frank Herbert really hated the logic bros because he was one of them at some level. He was this logical thinker. He was building these worlds and like really into science and all this stuff, but he knew there was a deeper level to the universe. That's why he talks about the spice. That's why he talks about so many of these different things. But in a genius way, he shows how the highest level of that, the highest level of attention, the highest level of prescience can also be corrupted. And so these are the deeper layers that you can start to think about. These are the things that maybe could be a good form of contemplation for the logic bro, for somebody to think about. Because then you can think like, well, if I do this, what's going to happen? Dune basically explores all the different angles at the utmost extreme of what happens if you orient toward being a logic bro and trying to control everything or letting everything happen to you. And it's a brilliant novel in that regard. And so if you haven't read Dune 1 through 6, and if you're like, oh, the second one sucks, get to finish book number 4 to be healed by and you'll want to finish the rest of the series. It's absolutely wonderful. Number 4 is probably one of the better philosophical novels ever written. So next up, we have Haruki Murakami, and his novel, Kafka on the Shore. And we are going to be reading Murakami in November in the Right Conscious Book Club for Japanese Week, alongside No Longer Human and Kokoro, if I remember correctly. And so we have already read Kafka on the Shore in the club, but I have a lot of content on Murakami if you guys want to check that out. I think I have like a couple dozen videos on him. But let's talk about Kafka on the Shore and Murakami. So logic bros hate Murakami because he writes about magical realism. He writes about this world that doesn't necessarily exist to them. And I'm not going to sit here and say that your cat today, like in many Murakami novels, is going to like maybe talk to you, or there's going to be some crazy coincidence, or you're going to move into some other realm. That's probably not going to happen. But in a lot of Murakami novels, that's not present. You know, in some of the more extreme ones like this, some stuff that happens that's maybe more slipping into fantasy or light fantasy. But Murakami is a genius because he shows the concepts of synchronicities better than anybody else. And so one of the best, I could sit up here and tell you all day through logic, through words, through this video, through all this pitches, all my pitches and all of this, why you should not be a logic bro anymore. But until you actually feel the other side, you're not going to get out of it. And if you just feel the other side and it's just feelings and all this stuff, you've probably maybe done that before. Maybe you've experienced that. And you're like, yeah, I want to just continue framing things through logic and deconstructing and destroying. I would say that's actually somewhat reasonable. But there's something weird. One of the best, sometimes you need to put your cards out on the table and like actually experience something. And I could sit here all day and tell you guys about Christianity or paganism, yada, yada, yada. But there are plenty of Christians and pagans that have had no connection with God ever and like just have this logical Aquinian connection to it all or whatever. But the best way to connect with the divine, in my opinion, is through synchronicities, is through awareness. Because if you open up your awareness channel and open yourself up to synchronicities, something weird starts to happen. I've told countless stories on this channel before about all these crazy synchronicities that happen to me. And it's because I've opened myself up to them for at least 15 or 16 years now. And when enough things happen to you that are statistically impossible, and you start to see a connection between your thoughts, your feelings, and actual reality, and there's no way to prove it, there's no way to tell anybody, there's nothing that you can gain from it, you're not trying to become the next cult leader or any of this stuff, your mind starts to be blown a little bit. You start to think, maybe there is something happening behind the curtain, and you don't have to go get baptized, you don't have to go kill a chicken, you don't have to do any of that. But that is the proof. But that proof will never present itself to anyone who is framed in logic coded. It can't happen. Because when I am like under duress or stressed or like, whether it's finances or my life or whatever, no synchronicities happen. But when I am calm and I am aware and I am open to anything and, I want to say anything and everything, but I am open and I'm leading with the heart, they start happening left and right at insane rates. Once again, rates that if I combine them all together would mean that it's this 1 in a 5 billion chance. It's this crazy parlay. And why do I keep hitting it? And so that is that deeper level of escape that can really, like when that stuff, like I escaped through feeling, when I was stuck in like logic bro land, I had these traumatic brain injuries and all this stuff. I started moving out of it. I started, smoking on the Bubba Kush every day. I started taking psychedelics, but I was actually still logic broed. It was still within me. And it was weird because I was open. I was doing yoga. I was meditating. I was doing all these things, but I was still viewing reality through this logical way. And when I was under duress or in certain situations, I did really lead with the self and with the single vision a little bit too much still. But it wasn't until I really these things really started to happen and I really started to open myself up. And it actually didn't become become a thing until I started hearing about it. I read Robert Anton Wilson's Illuminatus trilogy, Quantum Psychology, Prometheus Rising, and other people, and they started talking about these synchronicities. And I was like, what? And I was like, that's crazy. And it wasn't until I opened myself up to the possibility of them and actually like searched for them and like made it a thing that they started happening in mass. Like, you're like, what's an example, Ian? One that I always remember. I went to high school with a guy. He was on a sports team with me. We hung, like, just a friend, but not like a best friend, not someone you hang out with every week. And even once a month. Maybe you see him once a month at a party and you're friendly. He didn't even go to my school. He was on my sports team because he went to some like private school and like they didn't have sports. So I just saw him a couple months every year for like 3 years, and maybe at some like sports parties and stuff. But he knew where I lived because like people would come over and whatnot. He'd maybe been to my house 3 or 4 times. So I graduate high school. He was like a year behind me. Transport me till I'm 22 years old, and I'm at my parents' house. But I don't live with my parents. Mind you this, I'm living somewhere else. But my parents had a pool in Las Vegas. So I'd go to my parents' house to go swimming, hang out, during the summer. So I'm in my parents' pool and I'm reading a book. And a little bit before, like an hour before, while I was reading, I am like on a floaty. I'm thinking about my friend. He's not someone I think about very often. I'm not going to say I don't think about him, every 5 years, but I very rarely did I think about this guy. But I started thinking about him and like some of our interactions, and there were some magical ones. Like, there were some things that happened between us that I felt like, and I was thinking about the specific interaction with one of our friends. Like, we were out walking in the desert. We were like really high, and one of our other friends told this guy who I'm talking about, like, you're giving me bad vibes, bro. And it like was this like, weird situation. So I was just thinking about that. I thought about it at length, and I was like, was that guy giving him bad vibes? And I was like really into it. And so I'm sitting there, and then I fall asleep. So then I'm asleep. I do this. I love to do this. I'd go over there when I was tired and just fall asleep on the floaty. You're just floating around in the shade. And then I hear crash, boom. And I like jump off. I'm off because someone is in my yard now. And I'm like, what? And I look and I think I'm dreaming because it's this guy who I haven't spoken to in like 5 years, who I never think about. And he's now in my yard. And I'm like, what? I'm like, what the? I think I'm dreaming. I'm like, what are you doing here? And he's like, hey, man, I came back into town, been trying to hang out with people, blah, blah, blah. I'm here for a week. There was nobody. And so I decided to come over and knock on your door. And I was like, okay. And it's like, no one was there, right? No one answered. My parents were home. He's like, yeah. And so I was like, then what? And he's like, yeah, I just decided to hop over your wall. This dude hopped over the wall. And so you may say, Ian, that's just a coincidence. But what if you had hundreds, if not thousands of similar experiences in your life? Would things start to maybe add up in your head? Would you maybe start to think maybe something else is going on here? Maybe there's something deeper to this reality? Same thing actually happened. So I actually wanted to mention this. It was actually the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle. But we're going to talk about Kafka on the Shore in a second. In Murakami. But I was sitting and reading, this was back in like 2014, the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, sitting and reading it. Once again, I'm at my so I'm reading the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle. I'm like halfway through it. I get a call from a friend who I don't talk to, since high school, I've maybe seen a couple times, barely talk. He says, hey, I'm at the Santa Fe station, which is near my parents' old house in Las Vegas, casino. I'm at this conference. I have a 2-hour intermission. Do you still live with your parents? And I said, no, but I can come over and he's like, yeah, let's go swimming or something. Like, yeah. So him and I hang out and we're swimming. And he starts to tell me about his life. He starts to tell me that he hates his wife, all this stuff. And that he's moved to doing online chat room stuff with women. And he's going out and getting massages in Las Vegas. And he's assumed an identity, though. And mind you, this guy has never read a book in his life. Nothing. No interest in any culture. He just anyway. He then tells me, I'm like, what's the name? He says, Noboru, which is the main character's name of the book I am reading. What are the chances of that, you guys? And then I asked, why did you pick that? He said, well, I was thinking about my penis and how it was like rising up. So I started looking up, all these different words in the dictionaries. What? And you got to this name and this exact moment on this and I read books fast. I read a book every 2 or 3 days, especially back then. And so funny enough that happened with the Mr. Murakami, Mr. Synchronicity. What are the chances? Honestly, what are the chances? Please tell me right now. Oh, it's just logic. Things just happen. The way you can have experiences like that, and I've had countless ones, opening yourself up to experiences like that. Reading about those experiences. Reading Robert Anton Wilson. Reading about people. Hearing people like me talk about it. Reading Haruki Murakami. Talk about this slightly magical world, this world of synchronicities and things happening that may not be that exactly. And so I'll go back to my original choice. I want you to go read the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle. I want you to read about Noboru. I want you to open yourself up to this. It's funny. I said opening yourself up, and then I see notes in this book from my wife who read this, the last time this was read in this house, and their book names for birth, opening yourself up. And if you know anything about birth, it's about opening yourself, the intuition, like feeling, right? Like this could go on all day, you guys. Like we could tell synchronicity stories. I could pull tricks out of the hat all day. It is what it is. This is a dreamy book. This is an awesome book. You are going to like the Wind Up Bird Chronicle. You are going to like Murakami, most likely. Give this to a Logic Bro friend, and then talk to them about it. Kick them down this journey. And so, boom, there you go. Murakami. Next on our list is no book, but a part of literature itself, the totality of books, not the totality of books, in poetry. So Logic Bros need to read poetry. There are countless guys out there. I hear it almost every day. Comment every day. People say, I can't understand poetry, Ian. What's wrong? And the reason that many men struggle with understanding poetry is, first of all, poetry is so misaligned. First of all, like they're reading like Victorian poetry with Browning or Milton or Dante or Shakespeare or, all these people. And it's like, yeah, man, that's why you don't understand or don't care, because it's just all this a lot of that poetry is actually very logical. This iambic pentameter stuff, it's this cock measuring thing where everyone's trying to write the next best thing. Or you see like Rupi Kaur and Gabby Hanna or Ocean Vuong, and you're like, what? But real poetry actually asks you to tap into the soul. And the problem is, and this is why I think a lot of people don't get it, is that the best poetry was written from like 1920 to 1970. People like Robinson Jeffers, James Wright, Denise Levertov. I mean, I could just go on and on about these people. Figured something out. So when you look at the modernist poets, when you look at T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, and William Carlos Williams, they were coded in logic still. They moved themselves into objects. So William Carlos Williams' mantra was no idea but in things. And he'd say, repeat after me, no idea but in things. And they realized that their objects meant something, that objects were the spiritual thing, that focusing on the object was a matter of practice, that single vision could actually do something for you. And it can, but they never figured out the spiritual component of objects. And this is why William Carlos Williams remained the logical doctor. This is why T.S. Eliot was the banker. This is why Ezra Pound became the logical fascist. It's because they never were able to escape that. But the next generation, Robinson Jeffers, Robert Bly, Gary Snyder, Mary Oliver, Rilke, Pablo Neruda, the Spanish symbolist, Lorca, Vallejo, Juan Ramon Jimenez, I can go on and on. They understood the spiritual component of objects. They understood the act of leaping, about the connection to the conscious and the unconscious, and how nature and objects and God can be the bridge between that. They showed that on the page. And so, first of all, it's hard to access that type of poetry. Rewind and hear the names I just said. Buy their books. Watch my videos on poetry. Watch my Top 10 American Poets video. Read those people. That video, I do analysis of poems. Read some of that stuff. And it takes time. Let yourself take the time to be opened up to it all. Because, I have this phrase that Charles Bukowski is Rupi Kaur for men, because people love Charles Bukowski. But what's so funny is that Charles Bukowski was writing in the same time period as the Pablo Nerudas, the James Wrights, the Robert Blys, the Gary Snyders, the Donald Halls, even like the Robinson Jeffers, the list goes on and on. And the reason we like him is because we've been coded to be these sad boy artiste manqué alcoholics in our life, and we've been logically coded. And so Bukowski offers us feeling. He offers us sentiment in the most popular sad boy manqué sentiment, but also offers this logical narrative to many of his poems. He talks about the restoration of classic music and the men of old and all this stuff. He hits on all these different things while he's talking about the bluebird in my heart. And this is one of the symptoms of the logic bro, that they feel that there's something in there. It's inside of me, but I can't let it out. Instead, I pour whiskey on it. And I like Charles Bukowski's poems. Honestly, I've read every single one of his fiction novels and thousands of his poems. Like, no problem with him. But he's been elevated in our society because he's a pseudo shadow working poet. He's a poet not dealing with actually the real things. He's a LA purple sky, purple night-like sky, light pollution poet. He's not actually dealing with angels like Rilke did. He's not dealing with the Ohio River and the descendant and the transcendent like James Wright did. And when it comes to like confessional poetry, he's not doing what like John Berryman did. Like, he is Rupi Kaur for men. And so with poetry, it's a slow movement into it. It's something that you're going to have to open yourself up to over time. And hopefully by finding the right type of poets, which I've talked about on this channel, right? Just type in right conscious poetry and don't watch the videos where I'm like, modern poetry sucks, but where I actually talk about poets. Watch me talk about their stuff. You can join the Substack. I have a lot of poetry content over there and start to write poetry. Another practice that I would recommend is writing poetry. That's one of the best ways to get out of logic, because many of us readers I'm talking about, these 1,000-page novels, have been coded into these fictional works. But this isn't fiction. This is Plato. Plato's Sleep. Robert Bly makes fun, has something called Plato's Sleep also. But you read, even something like Murakami, at some point you lose the feeling in a fiction novel and it becomes this logical construction at some level, and you're in it with feeling inside still. But a poem, if it's under 20 lines, can be a feeling. It can be pure emotion. It can be pure transcendence, pure imagery, pure connection with God, nature, whatever. That can happen. And if you start to try and write that and try to strive toward that, you'll realize that you can't write that type of stuff because you're not actually connected to it. It's funny. You can't fake it, you guys. You can't fake like trying to write about like nature or God from a deep way if you've never actually done it. And the only way you can do that is break free of the logic. And so reading good poetry and learning the ways, and then trying to imitate poetry. You don't need to post it online. I don't care. Just try to read really good poets, like read Robinson Jeffers. Try to imitate him. Try to tap into that elemental voice. See the gap and figure out in your own way. I can't tell you what to do. I can't tell you how to get that dog out of you. I can't tell you any of that. Bridge that gap, even just slightly. And that's a good way to kickstart yourself out of logic in an attuned way, not toward hysterical emotion, but in a controlled way, which is important, because I've seen a lot of logic bros swing from being purely logical to being this Burning Man, pure emotional being, like I said, like the Mark Zuckerberg swing, and you don't want to be that either. You want it to be a genuine shift back over there, or to the middle path, to the flowering of the highest principles of both. And so let's now move on to my favorite author, a Mr. Cormac McCarthy, and his novel, The Passenger, which will blow almost every logic bro's mind because it's the perfect union. It is Cormac writing some of his best prose ever, because he started this back in the 1960s, even though it came out in 2022. So it's McCarthy's old style, like Blood Meridian, a lot of his Southern works, but he combines many of his new revelations that he came across at the Santa Fe Institute with science into the novel. So this novel features a brother and sister, Alicia and Bobby Western, who are prodigies in science, one could say. Both of their parents worked on the Manhattan Project. And there's a beautiful sins of the father angle in all of this too, because if your parents work on the Manhattan Project, which I believe in, Cormac also, and David Lynch believes is the conception of modern evil, then what's the downstream effect of that, But even better, these kids, especially the younger sister Alicia, embody this scientific idea from an early age. They put it in their heart, this new evil, this new scientific reality, what we would call scientific materialism or hyperrationality, and they plug it into their soul. And how does that work? Well, the story opens and Alicia Western wants to kill herself because she is, first of all, heartbroken, but also experiencing these schizophrenic hallucinations. And with McCarthy, we never know if they're real or not. And the novel is a rebuke, a cautionary tale against hyperrationality, against logic bros. And when you actually study McCarthy, you can see a lot of his novels are. What do you guys think Anton Chigurh is, other than the most hyper-rational McCarthy character? Call it. He judges morality and life and death off of the 50-50 coin toss. The most rational thing, it's a 50-50 choice. Judge Holden is trying to contain the entire world with logic. He's trying with simulacra. And if you guys want more intel on this, I had Professor Patrick O'Connor on the show. Type in Right Conscious Patrick O'Connor, who is a professor of philosophy and also the former president of the Phenomenology Society, and who wrote a book on Cormac McCarthy. Talk about all this. Talk about why his works are about hyper-rationality. And it's so interesting because, kind of like Pynchon, McCarthy was one of these bros who had this very deep sentimental side to him, and that drove him, but also had this very logical side. And by bringing them together, which in The Passenger some argue that McCarthy gets a lot of the science wrong, that the psychiatric stuff in this novel isn't realistic. And just a quick note, I just filmed like another hour of this video and the audio wasn't working. So here I am refilming it again because I love you guys. And so many have accused McCarthy of that. And the problem is is that something like The Passenger can be turned into a reverse logic bro Bible, where we're trying to figure out all this science and all that. But the science is actually the vibe setting. McCarthy ranting about all these different scientists who went crazy or discovered this or did that are just setting the vibe for us to realize that there's this girl, Alicia Western, who is way more talented in physics and mathematics than anyone we will ever know, and more talented than we will ever be. She is the queen of logic, because many people, when you look at their logical configurations, it's usually pretty weak, like these reductive logic bros. Like, man, so as a teacher, I have had to deal with so many of these kids. A couple kids a year in your classes, in classes as a teacher, every time you say something, their hand will go up. And I know there's this false idea, and I love when they repeat this mantra that their parents told them. Isn't it your job to answer our questions? Isn't every question a good question? It's like, no, shut the fuck up. It's actually the reverse. There are no stupid answers, only stupid questions. But these weren't good questions. I could be talking about semicolons, and there will, if there are one of these kids in there, they'll just be a contrarian no matter what. And then once you talk for 30 seconds, you realize they know nothing about semicolon. Maybe they heard one thing, and now they're the foremost expert on it. And what's funny is that each one of these guys, it was always a guy that I've met over my 8 years of teaching, always had one of those idiosyncratic situations that I talked about earlier. A lot of the time they were Seventh-day Adventists, Mormons, like extreme religions. And so they're reducing and destroying everything, but they won't look at what they believe in and be like, what, is Jesus really coming back? Were there really elephants in South America? Did Joseph Smith really see that dude Jesus and God out in the woods, and and after he transcribed the golden plates, it got taken away? None of the logic has never applied to any of that. And they're also bitter and unliked by basically everybody, which kind of further reinforces this stuff. But McCarthy in this novel just shows the despair, the delirium of someone that goes all the way into hyperrationality. And everything doesn't need to be tidy and nice. I would rather read a transformative novel that's a historical one that gets some of the garb wrong, the culture wrong, some of the historical facts wrong, that's still transformative, than one that gets everything perfect. And if you look at almost every single novel, they all get stuff wrong. That's not the job of the novelist. The novelist is there to manipulate you, to elevate you, to create some churning in your soul, to unfurl you, as Thomas Pynchon would say. This is YouTube. You live in it. Let it take you. Let it unfurl you, or whatever that line is. And so this novel also breaks the logic, bro, because there are thriller elements. There are a lot of loopholes in this that, unlike David Foster Wallace, I would say it's very similar to Infinite Jest, in the sense that I've interviewed a lot of people. I've talked to a lot of people about this novel. This novel came out with very high hopes, and people read it, and it's a novel that requires rereading, in my opinion, and collaboration in terms of trying to figure out what it all means. But there are a lot of elements of this on the first read that are definitely unfinished, and a lot of the big plot points are unfinished, seemingly, even though they're kind of not. But the only way you can actually connect the entire novel is through emotion, is through magic, and some of these other elements. Alicia Western in this novel is what I call a math witch, which is what a title, right? This novel also challenges, this novel also makes you open up to this idea of the logic of incest. This brother and sister in this story are in love with each other. And is that logical? No. But it's weird, because if you let yourself open up throughout the story and feel into it, you start cheering for them, you guys. As weird as it is, you want to see them succeed, because that's the only way that they're not going to crash out and kill themselves or hurt themselves or live a life of total despair, because they're the only two in this hyper-rational, traumatized state who can actually understand each other. And that's the only way they can come back to reality. And that's why this is such a powerful and tragic novel by Cormac McCarthy. And so I recommend this one to anyone and everyone. I would say that the first 150 pages of The Passenger are a slow start for sure. And if you give this to someone, your local logic bro that you sleep next to, tell them that. Say, a tip is, hey, I'll read this with you and let's talk about it. Great way to express our emotions. Get them through the first 150 pages, and then it really starts to pick up after that. And so shout out to The Passenger. So the next novel on our list is Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha. And this is so necessary for everyone to read. First of all, because it shows us how in a very short novel that could be read pretty fast and under 200 pages with large print, how to write something transformative. Tens of millions of people have been transformed by this novel. This novel helps the Western mind access Eastern modalities of thought. This is an Eastern novel. This is a novel that shows an Eastern path of individuation, but it's written by a Westerner in Hesse. And so there's a bridge for us to understand it, because a lot of the time, this is what I've noticed, is that the paths laid out before us in the West for individuation aren't great by any means. They're actually very, very weak. And if many of them actually require this like faith and this belief or this culture and this community, and if you're stuck in logic, then a lot of the time it appears very weak. Like, what? I have to believe like Jesus is coming back from the dead and all this stuff, and you have to get over this stuff. And like, it might be, obviously it'd be good to, not be a logic bro all the time, but to expect everyone to do that is actually insane. But Eastern modes of individuation don't require that from you, because a lot of the time it's about enhancing awareness. It's about contemplating the idea of the cyclical nature of our lives and of time. It's about, increasing your receptivity. It's about love. It's about all these different things, and it's in a much more chill format. There are no knights and dragon to slay and all of this stuff. And in actuality, it's how most of us have individuated. And it's in the long run how a lot of these logic bros start their process of individuation. Like I was saying earlier, opening yourself up to awareness or synchronicities or some of these things and seeing how it actually feels in your soul. And that's what Siddhartha does better than so many novels. Plus, it's accessible. Plus, it opens you and loosens you to the idea of things like meditation and yoga and breathing exercises and the contemplation of nature and reincarnation. All these different things that are ways to break down the armoring, the poisoning of the brain, I could call it. It's really important stuff to learn, to get into, because as I said earlier in the video, it doesn't take days or weeks or months to escape the single vision. It can take years, because from what I've been able to tell, it takes me about a year to install a new framing of reality, a new system of perception, an entire year, everyone. And I don't really do more than one at a time. There might be two or a couple on the back burner that are slowly increasing. But in general, that means that, to have any kind of variety, it's going to take you 5 years to kind of get over that hump. And that's what I talk about on this channel. What I believe in is actual growth, actual change in your own writing, in the world, and everything we're trying to do doesn't happen in a year. There's no quick fix. It's 3 to 10 years. And so it sucks. And this is something that holds a lot of people back too, that this process basically throws you flat on your ass the first time you have to do it. If you give up logic, if all you have is this one frame that you're a beginner at, you basically have to be dumb. You basically have to go back to nothing, because as you start to acquire more, they start to synthesize and all this other stuff with each other. But as a 35-year-old who's deconstructed and destroyed everyone and everything in your life, having to basically go back to ground zero and install a new framing is a really big ask for a lot of these people. And it usually requires psychedelics, a near-death experience, a confrontation with God, some of these different things, getting into meditation, something like that, a health issue, something like that, to really help people. But installing the Eastern framing and getting into meditation and awareness, just installing that frame for a year is one of the more powerful ones you can do at the start. Because if you do, you will feel better, you'll think better, and it'll be easier to access different states of consciousness, whether that's ecstatic or more grounded states. And so that's why, it's a really good novel. And this is a really great starting point for that. So next on the list, we have my boy, Yukio Mishima, and The Temple of the Golden Pavilion, which is one of my favorite novels of all time. And why this novel is so important is that there are plenty of novels out there, William Gass's The Tunnel, like all these novels that I know that portray the logic bro, but they just take it to its extreme, right? And all the time it's very pessimistic. It's nihilistic. It's this kind of dark, just the flattening, like all of that stuff. And if a logic bro reads that, they're most likely not going to have a negative Satori awakening and be like, wow, this is what I'm really like, I should stop. That can happen, but that's a lot less, I feel like, probable. The Temple of the Golden Pavilion is about a monk, a stuttering monk, a young monk who becomes obsessed with the aesthetics of this golden temple in Japan, in Kyoto or wherever it's at. He becomes obsessed with it. He frames his entire reality for years, for one could say his entire life around this temple. He goes full logic bro, and it's more extreme And it's a different direction than what most logic bros do, because they attach themselves to pessimism, to this deconstruction. But this guy and this monk in this story attaches himself to an object, to this crazy transcendent thing in society, and goes through this tumultuous journey with it. It's absolutely insane, and it can show you that there is a different path. It can show you the darkness and the insanity of all this from a different perspective. Plus, it's from someone who actually believes in something, because so many of our Western authors believe in nothing, and that's why they kill themselves. That's why their authors are nihilistic. Yukio Mishima killed himself because he was a schizophrenic, and it was his last act. It was the best way to put an artistic stamp on his career. But he actually did believe in what he was doing. He wasn't mentally deranged. He wasn't depressed. He believed in this idea about Japan going in the wrong direction. And in my opinion, fascism and the restoration of the emperor probably wasn't the best idea, but he was still right though. All the low birth rate, the little weak men and women running around, the softening of one of the most beautiful cultures of the East is very sad to watch. Honestly, we got guys like Ghost Dog down here and living it up in America instead, because you can't do it in Japan as much anymore. Mishima was a self-proclaimed solar author, and don't read PewDiePie's recommendation like Sun and Steel. Read Patriotism. Read The Temple of the Golden Pavilion. Read Runaway Horses. Read his prose and his fiction that is activated. And he's a wonky guy who believes a lot of wonky things. But, so I just talked about authors, but think of all these political commentators now. On the left and the right, they're talking about all these controversial ideas, and they're being racist or sexist or all this stuff. But at the end of the day, they're just little bigots. They're just little boys a lot of the time, sitting on a microphone at their house, willing to do nothing about it, just using logic to rile everybody up. Mishima stood by what he believed in. Mishima was a fly dude. He was an intellectual. He was a great artist. You'll read his work and be like, damn, he was smart, stylish, could get women, could get men, could get whoever he wanted, and did, and lived it up, was disciplined, disciplined in weightlifting and kendo and judo, all these martial arts. Really, really a significant kind of solar individual. And the literary renaissance is going to be a solar movement, everybody. Right now it is lunar, and don't worry, I get it. I'm a lunar individual. My Virgo moon trines every single major planet. I get it, but we have to flip that script. We have to become solar if we're going to make a dent, if we're going to push back against the publishing houses, if we're going to awaken the masses with literature. And reading Yukio Mishima, watching someone who did it, watching someone who activated and believed in literature, who believed in his work so much that he was willing to die beside it, not die because of it. That's something, everybody. That's the energy we need. That's the energy that we're going to be bringing to the table, because we're neutered now. No one's going to go out there and do any. I guess someone could go do something dumb, but that's a dumb idea. No one's putting an artistic stamp like he was with his, revolutionary suicide at the end of his life. But we can actually do things with energy, with style, and he is the template. And so logic bros need to believe in something. I mean, honestly, that's one of the best ways to escape. I was talking about making different frames. Just believe in something outside of yourself, in a movement, in your brothers, in your, whoever. That's a really good way to get started. So the next book on our list is Zecharia Sitchin's The 12th Planet. Oh, wait, wrong video. It's for the Alien video. Wait, hold on. So you guys already know that one of my favorite novels, actually my favorite novel of all time, everyone should go and read it, is Tom Robbins' Still Life with Woodpecker Man. This is the great American novel. Tom Robbins in this gets out of tragedy-coded literature. He also escapes humorous literature, because we have this divide. We have the tragic literature in Shakespeare, and then we have the humorous literature. We have the comedies also in Shakespeare's lineage, and we have the Slaughterhouse-Five and all this stuff. This novel does have some black humor, and it does have some tragedy, but beyond that, it actually speaks to a different mindset that all of us should be undertaking. The what I'll call here the woodpecker mindset, the revolutionary mindset, the anarchist mindset, the mindset of a believer, of a lover, of true vision. Everything I've talked about in this video, literally, about the third way out, about attaining true vision, is in this novel, explicitly talked about in this novel. Everything I've talked about, psychedelics and the way out, synchronicity, all in this novel. It's literally a field guide to reality through a novel. It's metafictional. It's so many different things. It's simple. It's easy to read. You can give this to anybody. I've had more success giving this book to people and having people read this than any other book on my shelf, literally. I've given this to book talk randos that not randos, like friends of my wife, back when I was in like Arizona or Vegas, my wife has all these friends and, I'm hanging out at dinner and they're like, well, what should I read? And, I'm looking at their fantasy shelf over there and I'm saying this book. And if they actually read it, every single one of them liked it. And so let's go, everyone. This is the movement. If you tap into the woodpecker energy, you will become an asset to the literary renaissance and you will become an asset, a soldier in your personal life. And so let us now talk about our final novel of the day. And that is Carlos Castaneda's The Teachings of Don Juan. And so when these came out, Castaneda presented these as anthropological fact, his experiences with this Yaqui shaman Don Juan. But in actuality, most likely none of this happened. But that isn't to say that Carlos Castaneda, an PhD of anthropology at UCLA, didn't study the Yaqui ways of knowledge, didn't study shamanism, didn't study all these things, maybe meet some people along the way with this type of knowledge. That isn't to say that he didn't do a shitload of mescaline and datura and all these other drugs, because he probably did. And I view this 7 or 8 book series as fictional, but with one of the kind of the better displays of paganism on the page in practicality, with techniques and ideas and a narrative form to it and a progression. Because I haven't taken any specific techniques from the teachings of Don Juan and practices and applied them to my life, like specific things. But the mindsets, the framings about hunting, about life, about, being connected to spirit, the warrior mindset, all of this stuff has helped tens of millions of people, has elevated so many people. I can't tell you the amount of friends I've had that I've given this book and it completely knocked their socks off and they read the entire series and they don't care about books at all. And so when we're dealing with someone who is a logic bro, there are multiple things in this novel that can knock them out. First of all, I don't care what you're going to believe in or what you're going to go hard with. But look, there's a little bug on my Plato book right here. I don't know where that came from. It's funny because it looks like a bug from Arizona and it'd be crazy if it survived this long through my move. Probably not, but the last thing I want is a bunch of lukewarm believers. Agnostics. I'm agnostic. I don't know what I believe in. I believe in something, though. Are you kidding me, man? Let's go. If you haven't graduated from atheism yet, if you haven't you're back at like Tutorial Island for anyone out there who ever played RuneScape. You're like still cooking, your shrimp and like, yeah, I'm doing it. I'm playing the game. When there's this whole expansive world out there. I feel the same way with the agnostics. Like you got off Tutorial Island and you're sitting there in Lumbridge. You're just chilling, never wanting to leave. And there are a million ways to explore our world and explore spirituality, but you have to invest. You have to care. You have to go all the way. So I don't care if you're a yogi meditator, an Orthodox Christian, Calvinist, a pagan. We need more of that in our society. We need believers. We need to bridge the gap between logic and, take the third path. And so the teachings of Don Juan are a good way to kind of find a lot of the mindsets that you find in paganism that can be really, really strong. Stuff that's been cultivated for tens of thousands of years. Since the start of consciousness at some level. Very powerful stuff. Really good story. Really good, like Carlos Castaneda and his fallout and, his life and the cult and all of that. Really fun to read about. The information in the book, and I used to live, down right near Nogales, where this story takes place. I've spent a lot of time out there in that desert. A lot of this stuff is pinpoint in terms of accuracy. And so I've known so many men who have read this though and decided I'm going to take psychedelics or I'm going to be more serious. And it's crazy because it's a legit path, the path of the shaman. People are like, a bunch of white shamans. A shaman isn't limited, and that term isn't limited to just, South America. All culture had shamans. And just because our culture, Western culture killed them for the last 2,000 years, burned them at the stake, or they made them dress up in robes and do it, their little ritual, doesn't mean that it's still not a powerful archetype to embody. And so boom, bada connect, everybody. Those are my recommendations. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you guys for all the support. And I will see you guys very soon in the next video.